in Afghanistan, when they came back, they really established the Maghreb, the al-Qaeda now what we have in the Maghreb, or the al-Qaeda in Saudi Arabia or Yemen, whatever it is. So in other words, what I'm trying to suggest that we have to see the broader forest in terms of the connection, the networks between the Sunni and the Shiite. When I was impressed, for example, in the tri-border area in Latin America, to see the connections there with the Hezbollah, the Hamas, is there some connections with al-Qaeda, and the point is the story is not over. The process continues. What we have seen now in Libya, some of the weapons that were released found themselves in Latin America, as well as in a place like the Gaza or the Sinai. So the question is, who is doing what? So I would like to suggest that when we try to assess the nature of the threat, it's not just the question of al-Qaeda or the old al-Qaeda, but the common ground of those who push radical Islam. And that's why I said we have to go back to the theological aspects to understand it, and therefore to get some of the clergy involved. And some of the countries are doing a very useful job in this area. For example, in Morocco, you find that women are involved in trying to disengage those who believe in radicalization. So again, whether it is the Taliban, or whether it is the Hezbollah, or the Hamas, or some of the other groups in Kashmir, I think there is a common ground, and therefore we have to deal with all of them if we want to reduce the risks.
Mark was giving me a signal here to talk about what we knew before 9/11 on this issue. And certainly by the time bin Laden came out with his declaration of war on the United States in 1996, clearly understood what it was he wanted, but that wasn't agreement in the intelligence community. It was on the people who followed al-Qaeda. Before that, we're seeing inklings of it, but there was a lot of disagreement. When you're getting fragments and you're busting myths, we're no longer thinking in Cold War terms, it's hard to get people on board to thinking in a new way. So there was a lot of debate. And then finally, on the eschatological issue, I mean, a lot of people wanted to stop with, al-Qaeda's, they want to overthrow their own governments. To do that, they have to tackle the United States and get them out of their own regions, and then they'll overthrow their own governments. And then the debate becomes, what do they mean by caliphate? Do they mean only the lands that used to belong to Muslims, which of course would include Andalusia, among other things? Or do they actually mean the whole world, bringing God's word, making it primary for the entire world? And that debate continued for a long time and wasn't really resolved until, shortly, sometime after 9/11, 2002, 2003, somewhere in there. So not easy. I mean, you have to, because analysts are parsing each one of these questions and trying to come up with evidence for answering them.
Sorry, so it was solved, and what was the conclusion?
Oh, yeah, I mean, definitely around the time of 9/11, and you could see this happening at the time, they were talking in end-of-the-world terms. There's no doubt about it. Come to Afghanistan, the end of the world, bin Laden's walking around looking like the Mahdi, which is, one of the figures of the end-of-the-world times. People were calling him that and traveling from the Gulf states to investigate whether this guy really was the Mahdi. All this stuff was in the air. And it just took a while to confirm whether, people in al-Qaeda really believed this for themselves, or it was all propaganda.
Just one little piece I'd like to add to my answer. There's actually two things from captured documents that were quite interesting for me. Notes from meetings sometime in September 2000, in which bin Laden said, first of all, we're about to generalize the jihad to the entire world, so get ready because we're going to be asked to do big things very shortly. And the second one is, and we have to consider ourselves to be a government in exile for the entire Muslim world. So he was talking really big, September 2000. So, he was talking really big, even, before 9/11 came along. And his sort of ebullient spirit after 9/11. I think was really, really indicative that he thought it worked. It was about to happen just like he had predicted.
But there remains the tension, end of times of government in the end.
Oh, but that's the whole point. You have to set up this government before Jesus will descend and break all the crosses. Yes. And the black flags have to come from Khorasan, which is the name they use now for Pakistan and Afghanistan. So they've adopted the black flags. They call themselves al-Qaeda in Khorasan. You know, they've done everything they can to say to the world, this is us, and here we're about to come out of here and really show everybody.
I'm sorry, I want to address the other question about doing analysis of individuals. And I'm sorry I neglected to talk about this in my time. Of course, analyzing what individuals do and think is extremely important, and how individual choice and attitudes fits into an organization. Because people live in community, and one of those communities is organizations, and then the organizations, you have these meetings and they make decisions. And so you have to understand the individual people and how they work with each other, and who has what kinds of attitudes you were just talking about. If your leader, they're all, by the way, all terrorist groups are premillennialist. Okay? We have to establish the 1,000 years of peace, and then Jesus will come. So, if you have a leader who believes that. Post-millennialists, I'm sorry, you're right, post-millennialists, excuse me, post-millennialists, they're all post-millennialists. Oh, I can't believe I said that. Yes, thank you. And, so if you've got people in the organization, especially important people, I think, of course, you have to know that. And so the answer is you don't just do individuals, you don't just do organizations, you don't just do relationships with other groups, you don't just do their military strategy, you do all of it at the same time.
Thank you. So we're almost out of time, unfortunately, so I'll only take one question this time around. And so the gentleman in the middle was first.
Colonel George Peter, I'm a retired civil affairs officer. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. What puzzles me is that these terrorists lived in the United States in our culture and enjoyed freedom to do basically what they wanted, yet they still carried out this plot. They were not supervised, were they watched? How do you explain this tremendous depth of radicalism?
Okay, so we're going to reverse, and I'm going to start this one. Radicalism in the United States. There were a lot of theories going around that this wouldn't be a problem in the United States the way it is in Europe because we're a melting pot society and all that kind of stuff. But the other way to look at that is it's just taken longer to take hold in some communities than perhaps in Europe and elsewhere. Where does that come from? If you look at specific cases of people being radicalized in the United States, it's a combination of being dislocated between different cultures, having this kind of background in their family, some sort of Salafi connections, if you're talking about the Salafi jihadi in their background, and then looking for some belonging for whatever reason. These are standard radicalization steps that everybody goes through. And there are communities where, in the United States, where a lot of these factors are at play. I mean, a great example of this was Lackawanna, New York, where you have a community that's on the fringe. It's Detroit, it's crumbling in some ways, and they're on a fringe of people who are making more money, doing better than they are. A bunch of kids who go back and forth to Yemen because their roots are in Yemen. There's only one mosque in the area, so there's only one place they're going to get ideas from. And some al-Qaeda guys come to this mosque and start talking to them. One of the guys is from that area. They start having pizza and playing soccer together, and it isn't long before this radicalization process starts. And then, as Habeck and others have said, how you react to that, plays into how the process proceeds or doesn't.
So I think of it in terms of a push and a pull. You have to have some sort of internal thing going on, and that's very individual. And there are all sorts of studies that have been done about those sorts of issues that can sort of push you towards something. But you also have to have the radicalizer to pull you in a specific direction. So to me, the interesting thing was comparing and contrasting Britain and France, and why Britain had such a very large number of radicalized people versus France, which seemed to have sort of avoided this, and yet on the basis of history, it would seem that the two with kind of equivalent sorts of people of a Muslim background might have been attracted in some other ways. The big difference was the presence of radicalizers in Britain. A dozen of the world's premier ideologists or ideologues for Salafi jihadism in general and for al-Qaeda in particular found homes in Britain and spent the 1990s radicalizing group after group of young men in particular. And that just bore fruit after 9/11. So to me, again, it was the presence, there was this kind of desire for something, but it had to be shaped by those guys who showed up at that particular mosque in one way.
If I may, I think we have to separate, going to the question about terrorism in the U.S., into two parts. Number one is the loner, the lone wolf. For example, in 1968, you may remember Sirhan, the Palestinian, assassinated Robert Kennedy for political reasons. And then, of course, we had the Yonah bomber for his own reasons. Unfortunately, was also from the academic community. And then Major Hassan, for different reasons as individuals. So one, we have to look, and this is the most difficult problem to identify, as we know. And certainly other groups, again, in terms of some groups, or at least several people, the attack in Oklahoma City in 95 clearly indicated the radicalization on the right and so on. And clearly throughout the recent history, contemporary, we've seen radicalization in the United States for national reasons, the Puerto Ricans attacks and all that. But clearly, I think the radical Islam is the major threat to us, and certainly we have seen that. And but what is a great tragedy that we find an increasing number of young people, Americans who were born in this country, or those who came here, became Americans, they are recruited by the al-Qaeda and other foreign affinity groups. And this is something that we have to look at very, very closely. We have not done so, unfortunately, as I indicated. And terrorism, in terms of the terrorists next door, is one of the major problems in the coming months and years.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. It's been a fascinating discussion. I think we've identified research questions to keep us busy until the conference entitled 20 Years Later. In the meantime, please join me in thanking the panelists.
Thank you all very much, Dr. Hegghammer. Thank you. Thanks to our panelists, and thank you to our audience. If you didn't notice, we tried to keep the paper short so that you could participate more. If I could hold you for just a minute, we have a couple of announcements to make, and then I'll let the panel go. But again, thank you very much. One of the things that we didn't mention up front, we mentioned our partners, Johns Hopkins University, but besides the collection that we have here in our digital archive, these scholars and others have made use of some of the other collections that are out there that you'll be hearing about. And what I think the strength of this coming together is that Through the course of the day, we've made in some longer breaks that you can take advantage of and talk to each other. We have representatives here from the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point. Dr. Nellie LaHood will be presenting later, but many of these folks have used that particular collection as well. Dr. Flagg Miller will be speaking later, and he has a collection of audio tapes that Yale will open to the public and scholars later. So there are a number of these kinds of collections that hopefully as you approach this subject, you won't just be using one, but that you'll see us as a group and help us partner with each other. And I think that will, this audience and others who will take advantage of these collections will bring together some of this unity that you've asked the panel about, and that they actually reflect between academics, the intelligence community, diplomats, and others who work on national security issues, and you have policymakers in this audience too. So again, I think it's a very powerful coming together if you'll continue to talk to each other, or have an opportunity that we haven't let you do yet, talk to each other at these different tables. One of the other announcements that I have is some good news and some not so good news. Secretary Vickers is going to join us. That's the good news. The not so good news is that he won't actually be eating lunch with us. So he's going to arrive between 1 and 1:15. So I'd ask that as we take our lunch break, that you try to be promptly back in seats by 1 o'clock. That brings up another point. Some of you will notice in the audience that on your badges, people have a red lunch thing, and others are observers that don't have a red lunch thing. So if those who are registered will take this break now, we have lunch set up for you, get your lunches and come back in. Those of you who are observers, would you please let those who are bringing their lunches in kind of populate the tables first, and then please fill in, because we do want you to have advantage of hearing Secretary Vickers in that talk. I'm going to invite, if she's still in the room, Michelle Martinez from our staff up to talk to you about the tours this afternoon. But the way things will go is we'll have lunch, Secretary Vickers will speak to us, and then some of you have signed up for these tours of the library and our records center, how you go about using the records, and the Center for Military History, which is housed here on Fort McNair. We thought you might want to hear from them. So those who are signed up for those, we're compressing the tours a little bit, and Michelle Martinez will come up later, since I don't see her, and tell you about how we're organizing that. And then for everybody else, we also will be showing a film on how the design of the Pentagon Memorial was selected and the building of that, and you're welcome to observe that. Michelle's going to come up and talk about the tours just now. And then we will have the panel that starts at 3 o'clock in Lincoln Hall Auditorium. You can't miss it if you walk through the atrium, through Lincoln Hall, all the way to the other entrance. The auditorium is over there, and that panel number 3 will be there at 3 o'clock, and then we'll come back here for the reception and dinner. That allows the caterers to do their business. I want to introduce Michelle Martinez. We hired her this summer as our digital archivist to help us grow our archive at the Conflict Records Research Center. Since she's gotten here, though, she's done everything that we could possibly ask of a human being. From, you name it, and I've asked Missy to do it, and she has come through with flying colors. There are 2 people who this conference would not be any kind of success at all without them. And although I'd like to recognize everybody, I'm just going to introduce those 2 very briefly. Maddie Moreau is here from Middlebury College. She helped us throughout the summer. A lot of you heard from her, and she's here to see the fruits of her labor now and help us through the rest of this. And Michelle Martinez. So she's going to tell you about the tours, and then if you'll let the lunch people come in, get their lunch and come in first, and then we'll have the rest of you fill in. And thank you again to our first panel.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. There has been a change in the schedule for our tours. So if you want to take a look at your schedules, the tours were originally for 1:15, I believe. I'm sorry, 1:30. I better have this in front of me. So they're originally for 1:30, but now, and my Secretary Michael Vickers, Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, was going to speak at lunch. However, we have had to move his speech back. Now he will be speaking at 1:15. That's where the 1:15 came from. And we're going to give him time to speak until 2 o'clock. And then at 2, we are going to take everyone who is interested in the tours up to the library together. Originally, we had separated them out for people to rotate through, but what I want you to do is after Secretary Vicker's speech is out in the atrium, we'll be holding a sign. We're gonna have some flags. You'll see me waving. And if you'll meet me there, then we can take everybody up to the library. They have a wonderful special collections there that's really very interesting. They do a great tour. So I hope that, you know, if you signed up and you're interested, that you will go ahead and go through with that. From there, we're all gonna walk over to the Conflict Records Research Center, which is where our offices are and where the archive is. And then we're gonna split everybody up into 2 groups. So, and at that point, you don't need to worry. I will help you get into a group. And we will have one group go to the Conflict Records Research Center archive, and the other group will go to the U.S. Army Center of Military History for an orientation. We're not gonna go physically to them, they're actually coming to us, so we'll take you to a conference room where they will give you an orientation. So, I hope that wasn't too terribly confusing. The great thing is we are still gonna get to hear Secretary Vickers speak, so, and I hope all of you have a great lunch.
Thank you.